Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where, oh boy, I am particularly excited about today's episode. Why? Because we have some fascinating conversations ahead of us. We're going to do some deep dives. Things are going to get real. I'm excited about it, and I hope you are too. All right, so the first story of the day, and also because we're going to get real, let's try to be both real and polite in the comments section, because a couple of these topics are a little bit landminey. All right, so anyway, the first story has to deal, it factors in a couple of things that have been going on over the past few years in the entertainment business, particularly with awards season. And speaking of awards season, on Sunday night, a big point of discussion at the Golden Globes was whether or not it was appropriate for Natalie Portman to call out the fact that it was all male nominees for Best Director right before they gave out the award, putting the nominees themselves on the spot, even though, of course, they had nothing to do with being nominated. And it kind of put a little bit of a cloud over what was a defining, or at least a highlight, in the careers of everyone nominated. Really only a defining moment for Del Toro, who, of course, ended up winning. Although for Martin McDonagh to be even nominated, I think that's that's kind of like a career-defining moment too. You know, Spielberg, it's just another Sunday. But for McDonagh, the nomination itself was a very big deal. But anyway, I could see that argument. I could understand that it wasn't nice to do that to those gentlemen. However, this is what makes it such a tough situation, because if you don't keep saying something, it's never going to change, right? Because I was feeling bad about what Natalie Portman did to some degree, and then the BAFTA nominations came out, basically the British Academy Awards, and they did the same thing without nominating any women. So I was like, that's not great. You know, I always try and give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and then a lot of times, unfortunately, I regret it. So that was frustrating. And then I was thinking about the fact, because, you know, a lot of people are starting to now discuss how long this movement's going to last, right? And then you think back to the last big awards movement, Oscars So White, and that didn't really last, right? And not only it lasted pretty long, like for 2 years, because it kept happening, but it's still happening. And so no difference was made, despite all the, the hullabaloo that was made about it, from nominations to the roles that are available to actors of color. So it's very dispiriting. So that's why, I think that everyone who is in the categories of the groups that aren't being recognized finds himself in a very difficult position of not wanting to be a huge wet blanket, but also being like, but there's no change. So again, what are we supposed to do? So anyway, in this space where we're talking about representation, I'm very happy to see a movie in the works about the very first black actress to win an Oscar for Gone with the Wind, Hattie McDaniel. I think that's fabulous. Now, this sounds like a great story. The producers behind it don't have a lot of projects to their name, but this could be a career-defining moment for them, and good for them for getting the rights to this. So, Hattie McDaniel, it turns out, this is the highlights, just to give you an idea of how the movie's going to play. She was the youngest daughter of freed slaves, a successful vaudeville performer, and one of the first black women in radio, which she then, of course, used to parlay into a film career. It's crazy because she had to play a lot of maids, and of course Viola Davis and Octavia Spencer have talked about having to play a lot of maids today. Decades later, it has changed. But Hattie McDaniel is credited, quote unquote, for opening Hollywood's eyes to creating multi-dimensional roles for African Americans on screen. And I'm sure if you watch old movies, Turner Classic Movies, and I love old films, I think, if you're really a cinephile, you should look back at the library of stuff that's come out of Hollywood. At least look at the AFI Top 100 list, the Best Picture winners. You should have seen these movies. But there are some real gems, that didn't quite become famous, but they're still very good movies. But anyway, when you watch these films, it's crazy to see black actors playing waiters, butlers in the background, and you think to yourself, I've thought to myself, what must it have been like for them to be working in Hollywood, and also how much they must love Hollywood and film, even because they're working there, even though they know they'll never get a lead in that time period in Hollywood. And when you think of that, what Hattie McDaniel was able to accomplish, being a name talent that was recognizable and had, a lot of lines, good for her. Like It's a Wonderful Life we watch every year. The Baileys have a live-in maid and cook, played by a black actress. And, you think, what was her career like? So I think to shine a spotlight on this would be fabulous. Just, especially considering how far black talent has come since then and how they still struggle and how in some ways the situation is the same for them, especially in the roles that are offered to them. Now, I think Octavia Spencer is an obvious choice for this, perhaps too obvious, but she is an Oscar winner. She's very likable, and she luckily has recently come off of Hidden Figures, which shows that she can bring an audience in. I think she was a factor there for sure, and she was a delight in the movie. I thought that she and Janelle Monáe were better in the film than Taraji P. Henson. With all due respect to Taraji P. Henson, I thought she overacted a little bit in that movie. But anyway, when I watched The Shape of Water, I know some of you would be like, "Why haven't you reviewed it?" Didn't love the movie, but anyway, I thought Octavia Spencer, Michael Shannon was amazing in it, and he's not nominated either. There's a great line in The Crown where they're talking on a side note about the Prime Minister is having to resign, and one of his associates says, "There's no justice in politics." Well, it seems there's no justice in Hollywood, and I really have to say for the most part there's no justice anywhere. But anyway, that's just something I think people have to accept. But I thought in The Shape of Water it was frustrating to me that I was watching Octavia Spencer and I was like, I can't believe she's still stuck. An Academy Award winner in small, unchallenging roles. So she should go after this like nobody's business. They should want her and she should want it. All right, so that's the first story of the day. And I'm curious, what do you think of the whole situation? What do you think of this movie? Do you think Octavia Spencer's a good choice? How do you feel about speaking out versus not speaking out? Do you understand the difficult position that many find themselves in? And do you think that anything will change? Ever? I thought this thing would change with female directors when everybody snubbed David Duvernay, and it hasn't. It's crazy. All right, so anyway, second story of the day. Next, it's clear that Warner Brothers ain't done getting their movie house in order. So I want to explain the latest developments. Let's just go over them, right? Because this is still a situation that's very much in flux. Will it change Warner Brothers? I don't know. It's pretty clear they're handing over the whole studio to their very successful horror division coming out of New Line, and we'll see if that was the right decision. And I want to talk about another decision that was made at Warner Brothers back in 2013 that ended up being the wrong one. All right, so I talked about Walter Hamada a couple of weeks ago. I think it was like 2 weeks ago at this point when he was named head of DC Films, coming again from the horror division. Now, Toby Emmerich was also recently promoted to somebody who was in charge of the entire film division, also out of New Line, where the horror films live. Other movies have come out of New Line as well. And he's been promoted to head of the entire film group. It's official. He was kind of the de facto one recently, but that's what Toby Emmerich's official position is. And then Ron Sanders from Home Entertainment is now going to be in charge of both home entertainment and theatrical distribution. By the way, being in charge of home entertainment is Kevin Tsujihara's old job. So theatrical and home entertainment are combining. That's, to me, one of the most interesting things about this latest development. And it's a sign of the changing times. With streaming, you have direct to video. I don't know if you can still, I think direct to video has such a negative connotation to it, but streaming films, like Bright, for instance, is basically a streaming film over on Netflix, and also a potential upcoming shortened window of release. They've been teasing this for a while. Maybe they're eventually going to get to it. I don't think it's gone away, even though people aren't talking about it, and that's shortening the window between when a movie plays in the theater and when you can watch it streaming. And so as you can see, Warner Brothers is moving in that direction by combining again their theatrical distribution machine and their home entertainment machine. And just like Disney is planning to do, that's one of the reasons they want the Disney-Fox deal. And don't forget that AT&T deal is still waiting in the wings to be approved. And one of the big things that was said to drive that deal was that AT&T wants a lot of digital content. And so Warner Brothers might find themselves making direct-to-streaming movies as well. And so I think that's why Ron Sanders has been put in that position. Now, Sue Kroll was the head of worldwide marketing, and she has been since 2008, and she's been at Warner Brothers since 1994. A lot of people, Warner Brothers is known for having extreme loyalty to talent, but it seems the same is the case for executives. And I think that that's a good and a bad thing, in front of and behind the camera. Warner Brothers is loath to get rid of anybody, even if maybe they're not doing the best job. But she's being promoted upwards. She's going to become a producer at Warner Brothers, an in-house producer, which means she'll have a distribution deal. First look, Warner Brothers has the right of first refusal to any project that she does. And people have pointed out, I think correctly so, that because of her years in publicity, she knows all the talent that's worked in front of and behind the camera on Warner Brothers movies, because she's gone on the promotional tours with them and talked to them about it, especially the top of the line people. She'd be very, she would be talking to them. And so she knows them. So she's got a deep, deep connections there, a deep email list, and so she could utilize that to be a producer. It's, Amy Pascal, well, she was fired into being a producer from Sony, but she remained at the studio as a studio-based producer, and she's, quite prolific over there. She's making a lot of movies, and Spider-Man Homecoming worked out for her. She kind of read Kevin Feige's coattails on that one, but I think Venom and Into the Spider-Verse looked very promising. So Amy Pascal lives to fight another day. So I think it's a true promotion. She's done a great job in marketing. Nobody can fault Warner Brothers marketing. And one of her generals, Blair Rich, is taking over, who's also been at the studio for quite a long time. Now back to Emmerich. I think it's not a slam dunk change. We'll see. Just because you can do horror well doesn't mean you can do other types of movies well. And New Line has had their failures as well as their successes. So we'll see what happens. But I thought it was very interesting. I tweeted about this. I said Kevin Tsujihara was keeping his same job. But some of you pointed out correctly that one publication, not everybody, but one publication said that he would be stepping back from his day-to-day involvement in the film division. Now, this really reminded me, I just kind of was like, you know what? You know who this probably really annoys, or puts a smile on their face, although he's having a lot of problems these days. His career post-Warner Brothers didn't work out, but that's Mr. Jeff Robinov. He tried to get some funding from China. I believe recently it fell through. He just really wasn't able to have a career after, leaving Warner Brothers because he was so upset that he was not picked for Kevin Tsujihara's job. Basically, he was in the position that Toby Emmerich now has. He was the head of Warner Brothers Films. And he really wanted to be promoted. At the time, I believe it was Jeff Bukes, head of Time Warner, could choose Jeff Robinov, somebody who in the studio was the head of television, and then Tsujihara, who was from Home Entertainment. And he went with Tsujihara because Tsujihara was known for being really popular and well-liked. But apparently not able to make good movies. But Jeff Robinov really wanted the job, and he did a very good job when he was the head of the film division at Warner Brothers. He cultivated those initial relationships with Christopher Nolan, Ben Affleck. He was overseeing the Hangover movie, so that means Todd Phillips was his. And so maybe Jeff Robinov was the way to go. And so I think it's probably bittersweet for Robinov seeing what's happening now. But as for Warner Brothers, Wonder Woman and It were both very successful this year. The top two discussed movies on Google, the most Googled movies for the year, and they were huge hits critically, with fans, and financially. But I think there's certainly room for improvement because the rest of the slate didn't do as well. They had their smaller hits for sure, but they also had films that I think could have done a lot better if they had perhaps been a little bit better, right? So can the horror division save the entire studio? We shall see. Now for the third story of the day, which is going to lead into the kind of viewer question. A lot of you have been talking about Stan Lee. There's been a lot of talk about Stan Lee. I've been asked to talk about Stan Lee. And I've seen some pretty rough comments made about Stan Lee. And of course, he's been charged with sexually harassing the nurses who were taking care of him. And he claims it's a shakedown. Now, of course, this is a legal matter. It would have to be decided in a court of law with an investigation, I think, to really get to the bottom of it. I think we have to be careful of not having a situation of guilty until proven innocent come about with a lot of these allegations. We'll talk about that in the viewer question. But with Stan Lee, the point I want to make is that it's been brought up by some other people who work in elderly care in light of this story, that a sign of dementia, particularly in men for some reason, is that they lose one's filter, and they can therefore get a bit randy. And so I think it would be a horrible shame, and I'm surprised that the nurses working for this company that are taking care of Stan Lee aren't aware of this. Although I believe that this new company founded by one of his former nurses, from what I've read, so maybe a lot of them are new to the job. And so whoever hired them should have known better, especially you have a reputation, you're a famous person, you want to make sure you get the best and people who are experienced in the area, in the field. But maybe he wanted to be nice to this woman who previously worked for him, and he's paying for it, unfortunately. But I think it would be a shame to tarnish the lifelong reputation of an icon whose health is deteriorating and his mental status, because he does need a nurse, because of something he just can't help. So I hope that that's looked into. I hope it's gotten to the bottom of it. But I would just caution you not to jump to any conclusions in today's clickbait era of news. And so that leads me to the viewer question. So on that note, a lot of you have been also asking me to cover the Kitty Pryde story. Fox is apparently, the rumor that Fox is developing a Kitty Pryde movie with Tim Miller. Or how about what's going on with James Franco, et cetera, et cetera. And I just feel very strongly that it's important for me to be careful with clickbait and stories that jump to conclusion to try and get there first, right? Because that's the name of the game these days. And on that note, Michael Douglas, I don't know if you saw this story in Deadline, Michael Douglas had to get out in front of an accusation that he saw was eminently going to be printed, and he was shocked. He spoke to that. It's a very interesting interview. It's in Deadline. I'll put a link to it down below. And Michael Douglas certainly has his checkered past, but I think he's always been very open about it. So I believe him in this case, unless some evidence comes forward. But I think he stated himself very well, and I'm inclined to believe him. But anyway, he said that this woman, these accusations were made against him from someone who worked for him 30 years ago. And the Hollywood Reporter had reached out to him before the holidays, and he had said, this is not true, this is libel, and it wasn't a very concrete story. But then he said after the holidays, the Hollywood Reporter reached back out to him and said, look, we think we're going to print it because it looks like somebody else, like I think Variety is going to print the story, and we don't want them to get to it first. And he was just shocked that a publication, a respected industry trade, would tarnish his reputation like that and risk libel simply to get to a story first. That it had really no corroboration. She said some friends of hers at the time could corroborate that she said that to them, but just, who knows what she told her friends, whether or not that's true. I don't think people remembering you mentioning it to them at the time is really proof, right? Certainly not enough to be, a closed case. Maybe worth further investigation, but I don't think that's enough. And so I think Michael Douglas handled his situation very well. I feel you can see James Franco trying to handle it now. He's in a situation where a tweet was made and then deleted, and Ali Sheedy hasn't commented on what she said, and he's now in the case where he might lose he might not get an Oscar. This could really derail, if not ruin, his career, and you could really see him trying his best to handle the situation. And it's crazy. It's a very crazy situation, And with Kitty Pryde, with that story, not a single trade picked it up. Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, no one picked up that story. So I can't report on something that is really not corroborated by multiple sources. So going forward, if you're wondering why I'm not covering something, it's usually because I'm trying to figure out how I feel about it to make sure I get my thoughts in order, but sometimes it's because I need to wait to see if the story is legit and if it's appropriate to comment on, particularly with some of these incendiary things that can ruin careers. I don't want to contribute to that, especially when I think that there's very good cause to think that they're not true. So anyway, this is a very interesting conversation. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this down below. Please comment not only on that last discussion, but also all three stories of the day. Anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and of course, as always, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.